Okay, welcome to TG2Chat Live, the live stream series of Teachers Going Gradeless. In today's episode, we have the privilege to learn from Dr. Sarah Beck. Sarah is an associate professor of English education and a program director of English education and learning at New York University. She is the winner of the 2020 NYU Steinhardt Teaching Excellence Award and the author of the book, A Think Aloud Approach to Writing Assessment, Analyzing Process and Product with Adolescent Writers. You can follow her on Twitter at SWBook411. Welcome, Sarah. How are you doing today?
I'm well, thanks. Yeah. Good to be here.
So we're going to dive into dialogic assessment of writing and how it can help develop writers. So let's go ahead and get started. Why don't you explain what dialogic assessment is and how it is different from other forms of assessment?
Sure. So dialogic writing assessment is a way of conferencing with writers that foregrounds the process aspect of writing. So in a more typical conference, a student might bring a draft of a paper and the teacher gives feedback on the draft or maybe explains conferences that they've already written on the paper. It tends to be more product focused. In dialogic assessment, the teacher encourages the students to actually verbalize their composing and ask questions to clarify, expand, and otherwise support their thinking as they compose. So it's a way, really essentially a way to assess the writer's process along with the product. And you, as a teacher, you can also use it to see if the student is allocating adequate time to different phases of the writing process. Do they dive right in or do they really stop and plan beforehand? It's a very flexible approach. You can assess any kind of writing task with this. It doesn't have to be a standard essay. It can be a creative piece. It's really agnostic with regard to the content and the genre of the writing. What is really important is that the students do live composing. That provides a way for you to not only give feedback and observe and assess their composing process, but also so that the student comes away with something actually written and feels like they know where to go next. So another important point about dialogic writing assessment is that you conclude the session with a clear plan for next steps for the student so that they come away feeling like they might have come in with nothing or completely blocked, but they leave with knowing what they're going to do next.
So why would we use dialogic assessment, and how does it benefit learners? How does it help develop writers?
Sure, that's a great question. So students get immediate feedback on their ideas and the opportunity to develop them with support. I think many of us have had the experience of receiving a student paper, even one that's a draft and supposed to be improved, and writing comments on it and not really knowing how those comments are being taken up and understood or whether they're being understood. So the dialogic assessment bypasses that problem. They actually write during the conference so that they come away, as I said previously, with something they can continue working on. They gain familiarity and comfort with talking about and verbalizing their process. And that's really important so that they can use this kind of self-talk and verbalizing in the future. And I've had students say to me like, oh, I can use this when I take my AP exam, or I can use this when I'm in some kind of formal writing situation, sort of learning how to talk to themselves and talk themselves through a problem. Because it often happens that writers get stuck because they feel like, they don't know how to think about a problem or how to kind of coach themselves out. So as the teacher, you can be that coach, providing that voice of encouragement and voice of problem solving. And the idea is that if you do this repeatedly over time, students will learn to internalize that voice. Another important part about dialogic assessment is that because it's individualized, students get feedback and support that is very precisely targeted towards areas where they struggle, because you, the teacher, are giving the feedback on their process, observing what they need in that particular moment.
So, so how would a teacher use dialogic assessment? And you're going to show us, right?
Right. So I have, I'm going to show you some artifacts from dialogic assessment sessions that teachers have used. And then Aaron, you and I are going to do a sort of role play with dialogic assessment. So the audience members will get to see a few different approaches to this. So what I recommend is that, or the way I've been coaching teachers on this, they come up with a list of skills that are required for an assignment to be successful at an assignment. So I have an example from a teacher here. This is for a literary analysis essay because I mostly work with English teachers as an English education professor. And the essay, it was an essay about Great Gatsby. But most of these really apply generally to any kind of literary analysis essay. And if you see, he wrote, he had this list of 10 skills. And of course, you can't assess 10 skills in a dialogic assessment session, but it gave him a menu to work with so that when he was working with different students, he could sort of pick from this menu and see like which student needed to focus on which skill in a particular session. So we have interprets the prompt accurately, has to write an easily identifiable thesis, has to write clear topic sentences that clearly connect to the thesis, has to organize paragraphs that convey a coherent argument, has to maintain the focus of the argument so that the point of each paragraph is always clear, has to identify quotes that relate to their chosen subject, and there were a couple of options for that, make insightful inferences about their chosen topic, and convincingly support all inferences with text-based evidence on the chosen subject, establish and maintain a formal style using precise language and sound structure, and demonstrate control of the conventions with infrequent errors. So this is really a large basket of possibilities here. And like I said, he only got to a few of them for each student, but at least he knew what he wanted to focus on generally. So then if you look at the second part of this sheet, this is where the template asks the teacher to determine what questions they could ask to determine what students have these skills. So planning in advance, what are some things I can ask as the student is working on this assignment with me sitting next to them? So question 1, in your own words, what is the prompt asking you to do? And this particular teacher found that in a few cases, the student really didn't fully understand the prompt. And that helped him to see that that's why he was getting essays that weren't quite what he was expecting of his students. And what is your plan for the essay? Some of the students were starting without any sort of clear plan. Number 3, can a reader easily identify and understand what the writer is trying to analyze and prove in this essay? And something that this particular teacher did quite a lot that was very effective is he would say back to the student what he heard when they would verbalize an idea. So that gave the student an opportunity to check, like, is that what I really meant to say? Oh no, that's not what I really meant to say. I need to say this a different way. And this particular teacher was also very good at making his thinking as a reader visible to the students so that they could understand how their ideas would be received by a reader. And that's another thing that dialogic assessment does really well. It sort of simulates the act of reading while the student is in the process of composing and formulating their ideas. So like I said, it's a constant feedback loop for the students.
So this is something that's always ongoing through the process rather than after the piece is done.
Exactly. You wouldn't do this when this is very different from, say, like a portfolio review or other forms of authentic assessment where they have a similar objective of student reflection and sort of self-awareness building, but that's more about product and growth as a writer over time, whereas this is more about process and like what is helping the student become aware of what is my process as a writer, what is working and what's not working so well. What are some aspects of my writing process that I would like to change that I maybe need some help and coaching with?
And would this be done something that's like face-to-face with the students, sitting down side by side, or would you put these questions in front of them, have them answer them, and then look at them later? How would you deal with that?
Yeah, you wouldn't put the questions. I mean, I suppose you could give the student the questions to look at, but I wouldn't recommend that. I mean, it might work for some students, but I think students already have a lot going on their laptops. Like they're focusing on their own piece. So yeah. I wouldn't confuse them with extra text. This is more like something you would have on the side. So how to do this? If in a face-to-face, back to normal sort of world, yes, it would be like side by side in a quiet corner of the classroom or maybe in the library. This actually can work very well remotely, though. Like I've been coaching some teachers, and I'm actually starting this year, I've been starting an initiative at my university to train undergraduate pre-service teachers to do this with high school students in a tutoring sort of capacity. And it's entirely virtual because no high schools are open in New York City, at least the public ones are not. And our students, our NYU students, are taking most of their classes virtually, so it's all online. But it's working quite well. Students can share their screens with Google Docs, so the tutor can see exactly what they're writing. So the process piece is, very much thriving in this format.
Okay. And so you're going to walk me through how you would do this with a student, and we'll be in virtual learning, obviously, here. So let's go ahead and do that. So I have a piece of writing that I have started. Okay, so help me out with this.
Okay, so hi, Erin. Welcome. Thanks for bringing your piece of writing to our Dialogic Assessment session. And I know this is a piece that you've chosen to write for your own interests. It's not a class assignment. So I wonder if you could tell me about this publication that you're writing for. Who's the audience, and why do they read this publication? What kinds of things are they interested in?
So this is a piece that I have started for a magazine called Spectrum Life magazine. I'm an education contributor to the magazine. The audience is educators, parents, and people with autism, as the magazine is an advocacy magazine for people with autism and the caretakers of those of people with autism. And so what this is a piece that I'm writing about my personal experience with my 15-year-old son, who has been struggling with his autism and negotiating online learning without any supports, and how it's the stress is just really getting to him. So the piece is just about what we have been doing with our son to help him get through this.
Okay, so that's great. It seems like a really important story to tell for this audience. What are your goals for this, both for this piece of writing and for yourself as a writer? Are there aspects of your writing that you would like to refine, improve, work on today?
Well, I want to make sure, first of all, that I'm authentic in my writing, that people see a human being expressing the pains and the struggles and everything kind of in between, the multifaceted emotions that come with being a human being and being the parent of a child with autism struggling in school. So that's number one. I'd like to see parents see that struggle in me. I'd also like to impact educators for them to really reflect on how this online virtual learning can cause stress, and that we need to be aware of the impact that, even though we can't always tell what's going on in the lives of kids, just taking the time to find out and ask those questions can really make a big difference in the life of one child. So.
So it sounds like authenticity is really important for you, and kind of maybe would you say that like being descriptive and vivid in your presentation would be important to help convey that authenticity?
Yes, that would, but also sort of my interjections, my own analysis, and adding my own perspectives into.
Okay. Sounds good. So you've got 3 paragraphs here that you're sharing with me. Do you want to just pick up where you left off, or do you want to revise anything? If you want, you could read over what you have here and see how what you've got kind of matches with your goals of authenticity and giving your own perspective.
Okay, yeah, let's read this over and see what I have. As a teacher, I have cared about nothing more than my students' learning. However, distance learning during COVID-19 has exposed the problems with my emphasis, and it was my 15-year-old son who helped me see how my priorities were wrong. My wife and I enrolled our youngest son, a sophomore in high school, into an honors English class in the spring because we felt that his creativity and out-of-the-box thinking needed to be both developed and challenged. Our son loved to read, analyze, and critique ideas and narratives. He can hold deep conversations about plot and character with me, a 23-year English teacher with a bachelor's in English literature and a master's in education. That gets me thinking about the stories we read together that make me reconsider my perspective. I thought, if he impresses me, he would thrive in an honors environment. Under normal circumstances, who knew how he would do? So,
okay.
Go from there.
Yeah. So as a reader, when I read this, I feel like that last sentence, under normal circumstances, who knew how he would do, is kind of suspenseful in a good way, and like is setting the reader up for an introduction to your son and some of his struggles, and sort of a brief character sketch, maybe a sentence or two that describes how he normally is at the start of the school year, and then how he was, in this virtual world.
Well, thank you. Well, so where do you think I should take this then?
Well, I think you could, in that, I know you have something written in green there. It says, I was excited about the start of the new school year. But I feel like I want to hear about your son, because this is really about your son and his experience. So I'm wondering if you could start writing a little bit, if you want to just try out a different possibility here, you could start writing a new paragraph after the under normal circumstances sentence, where you describe your son a bit in a couple of sentences.
Okay, so something like, so maybe just something like, like that?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that detail, if he was on his Chromebook before class started, really shows the anticipation of, this is going to be a new adventure for him, and that really shows that. And you also said that you wanted to make sure you included your own perspective. So you have this sentence here that says, I was excited about the start of the new school year. Did you want to find a way to link that up to the description of Aiden? Or do you want to pursue, do you want to keep going with the description of Aiden?
Something like that?
Yeah, exactly. So it's your perspective, but it's your perspective really focused on how he's approaching this new year in this strange new learning environment that he's in. Where do you think you might go with this next? I think should we wind down the role play and move on to the next
let's
question?
wind down the role play.
So where would you go next with this?
I'd probably continue. Well, the point of it was his struggle with school created more anxiety for him that caused him to shut down from school, how he went from this excitement and this enthusiasm to shutting down and getting behind. And the decision that we had to make as a family to allow him to take an F and go down from 6 classes to 5 in order to just have his own mental well-being. And that was really important for us, come what may, whether he has to do another year or, do another year of school or another semester in school, make up summer school or whatever. So yeah, that's where the piece will be going.
Okay, great. Well, it sounds like you're off on a good track.
Okay, so let's see. So the next, where am I? All right, so my question now is, we've seen how to use dialogic assessment of writing. So how might this be used in other content areas, like in math or science or history or whatever?
Yeah, great question. So it can be used in any teacher who is interested in, who does already assign writing in their subject or wants to assign more writing. You could do it in exactly the same way. So all you have to do is figure out what the skills are that are important for that particular task. So history is probably the most obvious one, because students often write essays in history class just like they write essays in English class. So you would have the same sorts of list of requirements, maybe not too different from the one that I showed you a minute ago in the example. With science and math, it's a little different. You might have them writing things like lab reports or descriptions of scientific phenomena that they observe, either in a laboratory setting or outside in the real world. But the important thing is, like I said, to figure out what you as a teacher expect them to be able to do in writing. And it doesn't have to be, and in fact, it won't be just about writing. So it's not necessarily about, complete sentences even, or perfect grammar or punctuation. In fact, probably I would say it shouldn't be for those content areas. But it might be things like in history or social studies, making a defensible claim, a claim that you can defend with evidence from primary sources about a particular historical event or phenomenon. That's a really common thing that historians do in writing. I'm less familiar with math, but I know that some of the pre-service teachers I've taught have had their students doing things where they have to explain problems, explain solutions to mathematical problems as kind of a short writing assignment. So that could be another thing you're looking for. And what I will say for all content area teachers is that something I've observed with English teachers is that they often end up spending as much time dialoguing with the student about the literary reading part of the writing as they do about the writing. So it's often not about the structure and organization or the writing specific aspects of the writing or vocabulary. It's often more about, like, what was your interpretation of this text? Like, what sort of claims do you want to make about it? How does it relate to other texts? And often the conversations will really go into what is content for English teachers. So I can imagine I've used this a little bit with one social studies teacher, and we're continuing to do that work actually. But what we're seeing is that it's a great opportunity for teaching historical reading and historical thinking when you start delving into the content that they're writing about. And I expect that it could be the same in science. I have not worked with science teachers on this, but I expect that it could be the same. And I know that in mathematics, the math education field has a long tradition of using dialogic interviews to understand students' mathematical thinking, separate from writing. So I think it would not be that hard to import this way of assessing students into a math classroom.
Yeah. Well, that's, it does sound like something that could be used across content areas, because what it sounds like to me, it's just basically about sitting down with the learner and trying to draw out of that learner what they want to ultimately express. Yeah.
Exactly. And then you can use that, depending on your assessment system, you can develop a sort of record-keeping system for keeping track of what you notice and using what you learn. If you start to see patterns across your students, and then a lot of them are just really not getting this idea of a defensible claim, then you can do a whole class lesson on this.
Right.
Or you can do small group if there's just a small group of students who are really struggling with this.
So what resources would you point people to who are interested in using more dialogic approach to assessment?
Yeah, I have a couple of links. Can I put them in the chat, or does the chat only go to you?
The chat will not do links.
Oh, you told me this earlier.
Yes,
and I think it just went right over my head. Okay.
But we can put them, so this will be posted on Teachers Going Gradeless. And so if you just tell me the websites, I will put them in the notes on the Teachers Going Gradeless website.
Oh, okay. Well, so there's my book from Teachers College Press, and I can send you the link for that. And then there's also, we have an article in English Journal, which I think might be free right now because I was able to read it online without logging into NCTE, that is about dialogic assessment as structured improvisation. That's what we titled the article. I wrote this with two colleagues, one of whom is Karis Jones, who's been on your chats before, and Scott Storm. They were both participating in the live chat last week or 2 weeks ago. So we wrote this together, and it talks about the different roles that a teacher can assume when doing dialogic assessment, the reader, the assessor, or the teacher. And you, as a teacher, you're always navigating among these three roles. So that's a good short piece. And then we also have an article in Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literacy, or JAL as it's sometimes called, that is more about it gives more dialogue excerpts of a variety of different students, and it's sort of like a short trailer for the book. So if you don't have time to read the book, you can just read this article and it will give you a pretty good sense of the mechanics of how this works with a few illustrative examples. And I can send you, should I email you that, Erin, the links?
Yeah, just send me the links and I'll put them into I'll put them in the show notes for you. Okay.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Well, thank you, Sarah, for joining us today and sharing about dialogic assessment. And I want to thank our audience for joining us today for this episode of TG2Chat Live. TG2 would like to encourage you to support our efforts as we continue to help educators around the world grow beyond grades. Become a Patreon supporter. At this time, I would like to thank the generous support of our patrons for the gracious support that helps produce content like this. Thank you again, Sarah, for joining me, and want to encourage everybody to stay tuned for our next installment of TG Chat Live.
Okay. Thanks, Erin. It was my pleasure.